Have you been looking for a way to stay focused on your goals and grow your MSP? Accountability groups from RocketMSP can help. We offer weekly accountability sessions that meet online with a group of your peers. Your success begins with accountability. Go to www.rocketmsp.io to join your accountability group today.
All right, preparing live stream. It's happening. So welcome everyone to another installment of MSP webinars. I'm Steve, your host. Today we've got some panelists who I'm very excited to introduce to you guys. We have Mike Clark, we have Zach Johnson, and we may or may not have Quentin Comer. All three of these guys are. Oh yeah, you're on there, man. You got stuck in this. We probably won't have Quentin. So we're going to talk virtualization today. I think what we are going to do is just kind of dive right in. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and just kind of like a mile-high overview of how much you use virtualization today?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, how's the mic coming through? Is it clear?
You sound great. Okay,
wonderful, because I just hooked it up about 10 minutes ago. Yeah, so my name's Mike. You guys know me from the MSP chat, SS Mike. Virtualization, we use it every single day. We no longer install physical servers unless there is some dire requirement, which to date, we haven't seen very often. Usually it's vendors that don't know what they're talking about. But even database servers, SQL servers, we still virtualize that these days. We run our RMM tool is on virtualized SQL. Yeah, so I've been dealing with virtualizations. Let's see, I started with ESX, however many years ago that was, whenever 4 was around. Then we moved into Hyper-V just because when 2012 Hyper-V came out, it just blew up, you know. The cost benefit was just there. Our low-end customers that just were getting a new server, and we just threw a VM on there instead of dealing with driver issues and just to make things easier for everybody. But the biggest benefit, obviously, as most of you guys are going to know, is just reboots. It's almost instantaneous. It's just worth it. I did see one Q&A question here: VMware versus Hyper-V.
Depends. We're not going there yet.
Oh, okay. I wanted to answer that one kind of early, because just like anything, OS
Pepsi versus
Linux,
Coke,
Windows, it all depends on the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like VMware. You know, I've got my VMware binder, but as general use, we go with Hyper-V these days. It's just a matter of what the circumstances call for. But I've been doing this for over a decade now. Done some presentations for VMware over the years on virtual desktops, VDI, when View 4.1 came out with PCOIP. Yeah, so I've been dealing with this a long time. IT service manager for an MSP. A lot of MSPs are going to be watching this, so I do a lot of what you guys do.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Zach, you don't have a camera, do you, Zach?
I do not.
It's okay. We'll make it work. Zach, if you could please introduce yourself and talk to us a little about how you use virtualization today.
Well, I'm Zach Johnson. I've been in IT in one form or another for about 17 years, and I actually started with virtualization back when Zen and Virtual PC first came out in, like, God, what was that, like 2004? That was a long time ago. But as far as where I use virtualization, I'm much like Mike, anywhere and everywhere, all the time. Like, I don't do physical anymore unless there's a dire need, and you know, that need is very, very rare. And But yeah, I've done a lot of VDI, RDS clusters, application delivery. I did PCO IP like back when the correct way to do that was to have a farm of desktops in a warehouse and broker remote desktop sessions to that. So that was a long time ago. But yeah, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm pretty good at it, I think.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Quentin, I know you got roped into this at the literal last minute. Would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, that's what it is. It's his microphone, I think. Yeah, so Quentin, I don't know what it is, but you sound like a chipmunk.
He does.
That's just the way I sound.
Oh.
Is that better?
That is extremely better.
So, Director of Technology, we are, I work similar to Mike for a copier dealership. Multiple branches, and I oversee our technology division. We have kind of 3 distinct offerings as far as technology goes, and managed IT is one of them. So I've been in and out of the managed services industry quite a few times, keep jumping back and forth between enterprise and service provider, and then enterprise, and then service provider again. Been using virtualization since like VMware 2, 3. I think that was the very first time I started working with it. And that was back when nobody trusted it. So like it wasn't really, it didn't really catch on yet, And so we started playing with it back then. And then obviously throughout the years started progressing more and more with it. And I've managed both VMware and Hyper-V, large VMware farms, with 50, 60 hosts and hundreds of VMs servicing both internal infrastructure and rented or sourced infrastructure to, this was when I was in education, we actually resold the services and the VMs to other school districts for hosting their infrastructure. And, obviously smaller farms internally and in the managed services space, and then Hyper-V, both in enterprise and managed services industry, and just consulting gigs too, and used VDI on both, virtualization for the infrastructure on both, SCVMM, which is System Centers Enterprise Management for Hyper-V virtualization, and then obviously the VMware and vSphere infrastructure too.
Cool. And I just want to vouch for Mike and Quentin, even though they are working at copier companies that also do IT. These guys truly do know their stuff. I've had the privilege of having conversations with these guys for has it been a year now? I feel like it's been a while by now.
Since the chat started, that was like last April.
I try and block it out.
Yeah, they try to forget me as much as possible, because I like to get myself in situations where everyone just likes to pick on me, but it's all love, I know it. So I just want to dive right in. It sounds like you guys all have just mostly decided that there's no when do I virtualize, it's I virtualize, and that's just it. If you've got servers, they will be virtual servers. There's going to be a host somewhere, but everything else is going to be virtualized.
Yeah, even
Correct.
Single server installs are virtual. Yep.
Same
Okay.
here. Single server, virtualize it and run it that way.
Yeah, and the benefits to it just they outweigh all the cons. You're essentially making your server portable. Backups are so much easier when you're
faster.
Yeah, that as well.
And who doesn't absolutely love the fact that you can take a snapshot and then try some crazy stuff? to troubleshoot. I mean,
as long as it's not a domain controller in a multi-DC environment.
Right. Yes. That's a very good point. But yeah, just like, hey, that application server is acting up. We have no idea what we're doing. Snapshot, go poke at it.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. So I agree. Now I have an MSP. However, mine is smaller, and my server environments are typically like 5 and less. Most of my server environments are like a 1 or 2 server environment. But even then, I do the same thing. I virtualize, and the fact remains that it is easier to manage a virtual environment. One, if you have to do a server reboot, that thing boots up a heck of a lot quicker than waiting on your nice big Dell PowerEdge or whatever to boot up,
and having no idea if it's demanding that you hit F11 for whatever,
exactly.
And you wait half an hour, and yeah,
exactly.
And you have to deal with remote access cards in a lot fewer instances now.
Mm-hmm. And two, another great point is backups are tremendously easier with tools like Veeam and Altaro and Datto and everything else that's out there. But the thing that I like the most about being virtual is typically my hardware has almost been kind of over provisioned, if you will. So if I know I need 16 gigs of RAM, I'll have 32 in the host just in case, or whatever, So for me, I just provision a little extra if something's acting goofy, and we don't have to open up the case and actually physically install stuff because it's already in there. So it's just the dumb little things that make virtualizing so much more convenient for us as IT administrators. However, the interesting thing I've never been able to figure out is, when do you use VMware versus Hyper-V? Because I feel like VMware has a lot of really cool and powerful tools that Hyper-V either doesn't or doesn't advertise very well.
So a lot of those features that you're talking about, Hyper-V has most of them. It's just a matter of whether or not you use System Center in conjunction with it. If you're just talking about a standalone host or a standalone hypervisor, yeah, they're about the same. Actually, as far as backing up, if you use ESX, you have to use the paid version, otherwise you don't get access to the API. Whereas Hyper-V, it's a little more common, or rather it's easier to do. We deal with that because we use SolarWinds backup. And the only customers that we can back up if they're using VMware is the ones that have the full paid version. Whereas our standard small server installs, which we did one not too long ago, application server, single application or single server environment, we just went with Hyper-V because we can just back it up easily. Now, one of the features that I like, and I will admit, I haven't gotten totally up to date with vSphere's capabilities, but one of the ones I just found out about not too long ago is Hyper-V has shared nothing live migration. And I actually had the chance to test that out, and it is beautiful. If you don't have a full, highly available fault-tolerant solution in place, you don't have to have a dedicated VLAN for your live migrations or anything like that. You just have 2 Hyper-V hosts. You take the VM from one, you have to enable replication, but you can just dump it onto the other one. You move the entire virtual disk, the entire virtual machine, maybe half a second of downtime, but I had a live connection up to it and watched it migrate from one host to another, and there was no delay. It actually worked really well.
Another thing to point out that shared nothing live migration, you can also do shared nothing replica for poor man's HA. So you can have 2 hosts with no shared storage, set up the replica, and set the interval to as low as 5 minutes. So it's basically doing a live migration every 5 minutes. You'll want 10 gigabit between the hosts, by the way. But if you have a really low budget client and you want solid uptime without spending a lot of money, that is a good way to do it. You want to be careful about domain controllers and that, but it is a great cost-effective option.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just as the basis for anybody that doesn't know that, don't replicate, don't restore. You can snapshot domain controllers, but from an Active Directory perspective, you don't restore domain controllers. It's easier to rebuild a domain controller in a multi-DC environment than it is to try to restore one and have replication break.
Right, exactly. Which is why in best practice, when you're doing the poor man's HA with replica, 2 DCs, 1 on each host.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you do that.
That's an excellent practice. Now we do have a couple of questions. Now Andy asked 2 questions, and I'm going to ask them backwards. What is your migration path after sales? And Andy, you might need to elaborate on that some.
Yeah.
I think I have an idea of what he's. So for us personally, it goes back to a little bit picking which hypervisor where. For us specifically on our managed services side, it's always Hyper-V. If you're a managed service customer, you're getting Hyper-V. Enterprise implementations where we're acting as a VAR or professional services or reseller, you might examine the environment and evaluate what is the best solution for their environment. But it might be VMware sometimes. So I'm a little different than some other folks. I don't necessarily pitch both. It really, or either one or the other, it depends on the environment. But for managed services specifically, it's always Hyper-V. The reason is because of our backup solutions and our disaster recovery and continuity. We use Veeam, so it makes it really easy. I can put a Windows server in there as the BDR appliance, run Hyper-V on it, have it be the storage repo as well, and I can fill right over to that device. So if you're running VMware as your hypervisor, you can't do that. You need a proxy in order to do that. So you need twice as much hardware if you're trying to attempt to do the same thing with VMware. And so to answer Andy's question is a little bit, during onboarding, there's nothing to pitch to the customer. We virtualize them automatically. We don't support physical servers for our managed service customers. During the onboarding process, essentially what we'll do is we'll come in and we will actually bring our BDR appliance in. That's the very first thing we do before we touch anything. We bring in our appliance, start backing up to it, and we can actually schedule a period of time where we fail them over to that backed up VM and start using that while we rebuild their host, their production hardware. And then we'll fail them back over on their production hardware with that VM. So we always virtualize during onboarding. It's not an option. It's not a discussion. It's not something we pitch to them. It's part of our onboarding.
Excellent. So what is the process timeline you take to migrate to virtual? So it sounds like
I kind of wanted to pick up a point on his Hyper-V only for managed services. Mm-hmm. We're the same way. Managed services gets Hyper-V, and there's a specific strategic reason that I chose to do that. And that is, if you look at the salaries of techs that know how to do stuff, a sysadmin tier 2 or tier 3 that knows how to work with Hyper-V costs about 40% less than a VMware expert. And so there's some strategic value in using something that is as simplified and dummied down and is well documented with TechNet and all of that as Hyper-V.
So are you saying that you're being cheap?
I'm being strategic. We're providing solutions that we can easily support.
Yes.
Right? We're selling an expectation to a customer is what you're selling. You're selling an expectation and a service. So the best way, if you can learn Active Directory, group policy, Exchange, things like that, assimilating them into a hypervisor that's formed around Windows is much easier.
So, Zach, when it comes to you pitch a new a new MSP client. They have physical computers. What does that look like for you? I mean, does it just you switch them to virtual and that's that under discussion?
Yep,
And when does that
pretty
happen and
much.
how does that happen? Is it like identical to Quentin or do you operate a little differently?
It's very, very similar. I mean, like I use both Veeam and SolarWinds backup depending on scale and fit. But we'll go in and like pull a backup from the physical server, and then I'll restore it to my Hyper-V host, and then we'll do a controlled failover and run into production. So very similar to what Quentin said. I don't do BDRs unless there's like the expectation that they want high uptime. I'll do a NAS on site and then be able to restore an image in VM from that. But that's, again, a strategic decision on my part.
I'm starting to understand when you use that word strategic, what you really mean. that's like this one guy local here. He never says I've run into a problem. He always says I have a new opportunity today. And it's just, I love that positive spin.
In our previous conversations, I told you about my margins, so.
Yes, this is true. All right, Mike, how about you? I guess the same question.
So we don't enforce moving to virtual platforms, mostly because a lot of the clients that we take on are older nonprofit. Their hardware may not necessarily support virtualization. We've actually run into a couple where there's been some old servers where they may have VT or they may not. And I'm not dealing with any kind of virtualization on the platform or processor that doesn't have VT. But
it just sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah. So what we end up doing is most of the time there's an onboarding project involved, and the reason that we're brought in is because things are out of date. So usually in those situations, we're spinning up new servers anyway, so those are going to be virtualized. But we don't necessarily go through the physical to virtual migration very often. And not to say it hasn't been done, but it's a little more rare. But touching on the same side with the BDR, we don't enforce a BDR at all of our customers. We do have the ability to bring those up in our data center. Since we host our own backup storage nodes for SolarWinds, and we have our own hosts in our data center, we can actually spin them up in our colo as opposed to having a BDR on site. So I just wanted to throw you a little bit of a comparison to how 3 different MSPs operate.
So I think we're pretty similar. I suppose I went based on the premise that none of their hardware needs to be replaced during onboarding. That's just a standard onboarding procedure, but we're pretty similar. We do an assessment before we ever propose a customer managed services. We can't set an expectation and support something if we don't know what it is. And so we'll do similar to Mike. If we go in and we do our assessment, we'll propose a remediation project first, which might include hardware, new servers, things like that. And then as part of that process, they're already virtualized. So it's pretty, although it's slightly different, it's almost exactly the same because we go into environments where the hardware is at that age. We're doing the remediation. We're not onboarding them.
And I don't know about you guys, but we've been running into so many problems recently with onboarding new customers whose domains or servers are just in a disaster to begin with that we end up just essentially starting from scratch. There's been a lot of instances recently where we've taken on customers and we walk in and we find out that somebody's gone and on their domain controller pointed their DNS to global, and it's a single DC environment. Sometimes we're able to bring it back, sometimes not. Dealing with a lot of tombstoned objects, stuff like that. So we deal with a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Ignored infrastructures. And we end up going in there and cleaning a lot up.
Yeah, I don't think that's too uncommon. We'll try and address minimal amounts during onboarding, cleaning up some group policies, maybe cleaning up some AD accounts, maybe some shares. But the second we're starting to invest time essentially rebuilding their implementation, it's a remediation. And yeah, sometimes rather than trying to go backwards and figure out what's not broken, it's easier to just start from scratch. Take good backups, always backups. Very first thing you do is backups, but sometimes start from scratch, and sometimes that might be on new hardware and infrastructure. So allow them to work on their current, while you're putting together their new, and then you're good to go.
Excellent. Now, so for small environments, what is the lowest spec hardware you go for? Like if we're talking 1 or 2 VMs.
So we always go for hardware that obviously Xeon processors. We don't do the Jimmy rig stuff where you run an i7 quad core with VMs on it on a Dell workstation. I see that constantly. We don't do that. We go in, it's Xeon hardware, depending on their demands. If it's pretty small, we can get away with a single processor. Most come standard, average around 8 cores, so you're good to go there. And we always split it out. So at a minimum, our customers always have 2 VMs. One is a domain controller, and one can be a file print server, or depending on the line of business application, file print line of business. But the second that line of business application starts to become a true line of business application, we split it out into its own server as well. We always have something that can support a minimum of 2 servers, or 2 VMs, and RAID 6, RAID 10.
Parity RAID over 2 terabytes is just a bad idea.
And, we'll typically split it out, and the host will get smaller drives, maybe in a RAID 1, for the host OS. And then the data stores will run in a RAID 10. Nothing smaller than, we usually go nothing smaller than 15,000 RPM SAS drives. And then, we kind of go from there. So we separate out the data store where we're going to be hosting the VMs and stuff separate from the drives that are running the hypervisor.
How about you, Mike? Do your minimum specs, so to speak, differ?
Similar. It's going to be at least a single core processor, 8 core. Although I think with the new Dell lineup, they're bumping that up even higher. We have roughly 32 gigs of RAM minimum. Although these days we're actually going for 64. Always do RAID 10 unless it's some crazy large storage thing, which that'll have a custom solution for it. I was joking, but not joking about parity RAID that large. I just don't like parity RAID these days. But
so yeah, you use
10 or 15K drives is our average. But if it's a very, very low budget customer, we're not opposed to putting 7,200 RPM drives in there, as long as it's less than 10 users or so.
Right, and you set the expectation about how this is going to perform.
Right, exactly. You still get a lot of the benefits of it even on 7,200 RPM drives, but just not as much.
And Zach, any differences for you with hardware?
Nope, very similar. 32 gigs, single core, at least 8 CPU, or single socket, 8 CPUs, 32 gigs of RAM, and RAID 10, 15,000 RPM. Sometimes SSDs.
And that's kind of helps us lead into the next question. What are your thoughts on solid state drives and servers? This person recently had a vendor say, no, don't put solid states in their application server.
I'd like to know the reasoning behind that.
Agreed.
I kind of would too. I feel like SSDs are just, I love them.
As long as it's server quality,
Yeah,
right. Going and buying
Don't go buy SanDisk like desktop SSDs and slap them in a server.
So he shouldn't get the OCZ.
Whatever those are called now. Yeah. Now, Samsung, Intel, they both make very high quality silver quality drives. I will say that Dell charges an arm and a leg for them. I really don't think that their cost is associated, rather their uplift is worth it. But there are cases where we've done it even recently, where we've dropped solid states in application servers. We knew it was going to be running SQL. We wanted the IOPS. So yeah, why not? Now, I will say that we didn't do pure solid state throughout the entire server. We had some spinning disks for data storage. But yeah, the OS core applications, that's all running on solid states, and we love it.
Yeah, and I've been doing some stuff with NVMe for VDI, which performs very, very well for that purpose.
Cool. What have you been running?
I'm sorry?
What have you been running?
The Intel NVMe drives. Like, I got some of the smaller ones. We're labbing them out, and they're basically a giant PCI Express card you slap in there, and it's capable of 750,000 IOPS, running Citrix Zen Desktop.
Okay.
So we, I don't put solid state drives in as a standard. I know a lot of folks are moving to that. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's good future proofing behind it. On the flip side, I also believe there's a cost to doing business, and that needs to be communicated and educated to our customers. Too many times folks allow the customer to dictate the solution, whether it's based on price or whatever it might be. But so you have to evaluate the scenario. We don't do solid state as a standard across servers unless there's a need for it. We'll typically go 15,000 RPM, like I said earlier, SAS drives in a RAID 10. But as environments scale or line of business application changes, your needs and expectations change. So it's kind of based on the expectations and needs of the environment. If we do have a high intensity line of business application, environments that are getting to that size, they're probably not your typical single processor, 32 gig of RAM, single host implementation. You're probably looking at a DAS or SAN or something along those lines, and then you're able to implement solutions like caching, with SSD drives and things like that. So the scale really changes, but so it's kind of based on the environment. We do have some customers where they have a data store that's on SSD because of their line of business application, and they actually only have 3 VMs. They just happen to be a small environment that does a lot of transactions in business. So not all environments are the same, but at the same token too, we go in with the solution that we feel is right, and it's accurately sized and proposed for their environment. Whatever we determine that is based on the needs and expectations, and that's what we propose to them. So there's kind of two sides of it,
Right, and one thing to remember is that when you're speccing this box for this virtualization, you're not speccing for what they need right now. You're speccing it for what they're going to need in 5 years when this thing is coming up for replacement.
I feel an RMM discussion coming on based on that. No, you don't order for what they have now. What they have now, you're replacing. You order
because I've had sales meetings with a lot of clients, and they're like, okay, we want a new server, and I'm like, okay, what do you need now? And I'm like, okay, what are your growth projections over the next 5 years? And they're like, oh, well, in 5 years we plan on having 14 more employees, and so that's going to change what I'm going to spec, because I got to support this thing for the next 5 years, and when they double or triple the workload on it, that's going to change what I'm going to spec.
Yeah. It's all about expectations. It's all about what we're proposing and how it fits into their business and helps their business achieve their goals. They tell us that piece, what their goals are, how their business operates, what their expectations are, and we develop the solution for that.
Excuse me. So somebody asked, they said the line between consumer and commercial SSD seems to be a gray area. Would you consider Samsung 850s to be consumer? And I personally would absolutely say yes. And not only would I say yes, but I would say that Samsung has a line specifically for servers, and that's like the PM series or the SM series of solid state drives. Your thoughts, guys?
Really a gray area. It's pretty black and white. There are the enterprise drives or their consumer drives, and if you look up the Samsung website, 850 Pro, the very first thing it says is that it's a consumer drive. Right there on the website.
Yeah, on the Samsung website, when you look at flash storage, there's client SSD and there's enterprise SSD. It's pretty cut and dry, in my opinion, that you really need to be on enterprise SSD.
And that's not just a function of performance either. Like, I think that's what he was getting at, is that the performance of the 850 Pro consumer drive compared to the PM or SM series, it's like, yeah, they perform similarly.
They do, but the failure rate is going to be different.
Right.
And the reliability.
That's actually not the biggest difference. The biggest difference between consumer and commercial grade drives is onboard capacitors.
Yes.
Your consumer drives do not have them. They are liable to data loss in the event of loss of power.
That's right.
Commercial drives.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's also some firmware functionality in the enterprise drives that is available to like storage subsystems and things like that is pretty important as well.
Right. There's also SLC versus MLC versus TLC. Your single layer, come on, brain. Single layer cell. Basically, when it came to your server SSDs, you always wanted SLC or eMLC. Then it became that you would want MLC, and TLC was not allowed. And then Dell started talking about supporting trim and all of these other things, but it's still just not a good idea to put consumer grade drives into commercial environments.
That's absolutely true.
And even when you look at the Dell SSDs, most of those are Intel or Samsung rebranded enterprise drives.
Yep. So let's talk about, let's go down a few rungs on the ladder, because I feel like we're talking very high level stuff right now, and you never know, we want to appeal to all of the audiences. So let's talk some best practices. How do you determine what specs you need for an environment? And I'm not talking for a small environment, for a big environment. How do you calculate how much RAM, how many CPUs, how much disk space that you need for a virtual environment?
So your disk space, that should be done during your assessment and evaluation. You should know how much data they have, how much they house. Your domain controller, DNS, file, print servers, those are fairly standard. Most of them only need one vCPU, 4 gigs of RAM, unless you're doing anything crazy with FSRM, in which case you want to throw a little more memory at it. It kind of comes down to the amount of users, type of line of business applications, and you also have a bunch of factors to take into account. But if it's a 20 user environment, it's really not that different from 100 user environment. It's just a matter of scale. You have to start looking into redundancy. You have to start to look into the cost to the business. In a 10-person environment, the server being down for 30 minutes, well, it's a problem, but it's not going to kill them. 100 users, on the other hand, you can monetize how much they're losing. And they're more often than not, as long as they take their technology seriously, they're willing to put the money into the infrastructure to not happen.
Yeah, it's just kind of an example of that monetizing the loss. In one of my big enterprise jobs in my past, it was for call centers, and they track everything down to the minute. So they knew that an outage cost them around $4,700 a minute for downtime. So
that is absolutely nuts.
So when stuff was down, it was a big deal.
That is absolutely nuts. So, and that's when you go in, you can say, well, we've got this great BDR solution, and that comes to be a nice new sales pitch for them.
Right, and that segues it nicely into the Hyper-V versus VMware discussion. Because if you've got a client that absolutely cannot tolerate any downtime ever, going with VMware enterprise features with FT and instant failover, bringing Veeam into the picture for rapid disaster recovery and things like that. That's where those types of conditions lead to exploring options like that have extremely high cost to them.
Excellent. Now, how do you guys determine when you want to be in-house versus using a data center? Oh, actually, wait, I'm sorry. I see a question in the chat. Zach, how did they come to that number of $4,700 a minute?
So in big call center environments, they track everything. Every task, every call, they break down the call into different portions of it. So the greeting, the work done after call work, idle time between calls. And when you're outsourcing for very large companies, usually the billing works out to availability of agents in seats per minute. So there's your minute opportunity cost. The financial analysts have broken down the wage cost and figured out the minutes for that. There's a lot of math. But yeah, that's they took all of that big analytical data that they had and combined it together and could come up with a lost revenue to wage and lost opportunity cost.
That's very cool. So now we'll go back to the other question. When do you determine when you want to be virtualized in-house versus using a data center? And that could be a local data center where you are co-locating some hardware, or you could even be talking about Azure or Amazon or whatever.
I guess I'll take that one. So it all comes down again to cost to the business. We recently decided, instead of building out a data center here in our headquarters office, we decided to just go ahead and go with a local company. The cost for us to build out redundant HVAC, redundant ISPs, redundant power, all of it, it just wasn't worth it. We did the math on it, and it came out to be very high, and it just wasn't worth it for us. So it all depends on the needs of the customer. If they are a type of organization that is majority in one building, they could actually benefit from having that in-house, because then you don't have all of the issues of internet connectivity, routing issues, all of the crazy stuff that comes around if they just need to be able to access their line of business applications on their virtual machines. But in the instances of dispersed companies that have multiple offices, which is something that we're going through because we've acquired 2 companies this year, that you just have to weigh the impact of the business in the cases of if a site or an entire company goes offline. For us, if we were to put, Here, let me throw a customer out there. We have a customer, it's 250, 300 users. But the majority of them are in their headquarters office. For them, the applications that they used, it made sense for them to have most of their equipment in their headquarters office. As they've started to move to more cloud services, their branches have started to open up. They're using a lot more basically internet connection as opposed to servers in headquarters. And it just makes sense for them to start to get that stuff out of headquarters, start to put it out more, because as they branch out further and further across the US or across the world, it just doesn't make sense to keep it in-house anymore. Now, whether they want to keep that private or go public, in my opinion, Azure, AWS, a lot of that stuff, you only do that if you need truly, truly highly available things. In our case, we do, we're under an NDA, so I can't really talk about it, but we do something for a lot of companies all across the US. And it's something that needs to be highly available. Instead of putting that on our servers in our data center, we went with AWS. But for our other line of business stuff, we have that in our data center. Well, I say our data center, but the rack that we lease.
Sure.
It all just, it really comes down to needs. But Zach, did you have anything to add on that?
I was going to say, wanted to speak a little bit about public cloud versus, dedicated private cloud, or even just dedicated hosting. Like, I make a very clear distinctions between dedicated servers and dedicated virtualization and private cloud and public cloud. So to me, cloud is about orchestration, and there's a great analogy that's thrown around a lot, talking about workloads, and are your workloads pets or are they cattle? And so the analogy is that a pet, when it gets sick, you take it to the vet and you fix it. But if you have cattle and a cow gets sick, you drag it out back and you shoot it. So
you're not a nice person.
Well, it's an apt analogy, because that does work in agriculture. That's what they do with like sick cattle. At that scale, it costs them less to just cull. And so if you take that concept and apply it to line of business applications, or in this case service delivery, you construct your infrastructure and workloads in such a way that they're elastic, and individual components of that infrastructure can be discarded as needed, above a certain threshold. So that's why Amazon and Azure have all these different component services, database is separate from compute, which is separate from storage, which is separate from different tiers of storage. And so you can build out your workloads so that let's say you've got a SaaS app that has this cattle-like workloads, and you get a logon storm. It's 8 a.m. everybody's logging in. Well, your servers are getting overwhelmed. And so your application performance monitoring should see that and then start triggering orchestrated scripts that spin up additional load balancers, additional compute nodes, and start, balancing all those logons across more servers, and then it handles it. And then when that's done and everybody's in and you don't need that, extra resources, it scales it back down. And that's the big impetus behind all these public cloud vendors doing hourly, or in some cases minute billing increments, because sometimes you just need a bunch more stuff for 30 minutes and then it goes away. Those cattle are taken out back and shot. So that's where I kind of draw the line in, does this need to be, are these pet workloads or are these cattle workloads? And, is there a discussion about, should we convert these to cattle workloads? Does that make sense? That kind of discussion.
Interesting. Quentin, do you have anything that you'd like to add? You're muted.
Oh, there we go. I said I missed 90% of that except for killing cattle and pets.
He doesn't kill the pets. He loves the pets.
Yes.
Got it.
So we were talking about when do you use in-house versus an outsourced solution, whether it's a rack that you lease somewhere else or Azure, AWS, whatever.
Like internally or customers directly or?
For customers.
Should I just go over the whole thing again?
Yeah, can you start over, please? It really depends. It depends on expectations, deliverability of that service, and ultimately, potentially depending on how they're spread out, if they're multi-branches, things like that. Personally, I like to leverage the cloud if we can. We use Azure. I post about it regularly in Discord. I have some customers where we go in and it's not an advantageous situation to slump a bunch of hardware in there because maybe they just don't need the hardware. They need a domain and they need a few other things. And so we'll spin up a DC in Azure and do a site-to-site VPN with a failover LTE and include that in their managed service agreement, and away we go. It makes our sales track a lot easier, reduces the capital expenditures, and we still maintain our margin and our standards, and the customer gets what they need as well. So it really kind of depends on the needs of the environment. If it's a small, maybe it's a CPA firm or something like that, and we can get away with, they access QuickBooks, they access like 2 or 3 applications. Maybe they want to be able to access it remotely because they're out, in our area, especially a lot of the CPA firms do auditing. So they'll audit school districts and county offices and things like that. We'll start talking hosted RDS for them, or whatever it might be. Then that way it's a lot more scalable. It's easier to support and maintain, and it's a lot more scalable too. At that point, the desktops become a commodity. They're just slightly irrelevant. We just replace them if they fail. And depending on the size of the customer, if we're looking at something where we go with that across the board, maybe we include some low cost desktops or something like that. If my margins are so high on that account that a desktop dies and I can replace it with a $200 refurb or $250 refurb because the desktop's just a gateway into their real environment, then I'm okay with that. But it completely depends on the environment, It's really hard to determine without having an example in front of you, but CPAs is probably the easiest one. Tax offices, things like that. Most of those you could probably get away with moving over to a completely hosted environment. I specifically have one customer who does telemetry for agriculture. So essentially what they do is they go out and they install nodes and towers for the agriculture industry, and they monitor, alert, and maintain crops for all their agriculture customers. Well, because of that, they have no computers. Their entire workforce is farmers and ag, the people who go out and install it and stuff like that. So they have maybe one desktop computer that they use in their office, but they have 30 employees, So their infrastructure, we have them completely in Azure. And they have 2 VMs, and they're looking at standing up an additional VM based on node counts every 6 to 9 months. There's absolutely no reason for that to be on premise for them. It needs to be highly available. It needs to scale as they scale, and it needs to have processing power behind it. And so there's no benefit in that scenario to bringing that on premise.
So I'll pose a question for you then. So since this is targeted mostly towards MSPs, what would you say your opinion is on building out your own private cloud to sell to your customers versus just going and reselling Azure or AWS?
I think there's pros and cons. to some extent, I step back some days and I look at it, and we have the hardware to build out colo, and get it in there. It's something else to manage. It's capital expenditures for us as hardware dies and becomes replaced and things like that. It's a lot more, it provides certain flexibilities that Azure and other scenarios don't, because it's essentially 100% manageable and scalable by us. We're not relying on Azure's API or infrastructure or things like that. On the flip side, there's certain scenarios where Azure is far more dynamic than anything I could ever provide. And scalable, and their API is accessible and completely published. And for me personally, every time I come back to look at building out a colo or something for us, I can't find a good reason that I need to have absolutely jumped on it yesterday. There's a lot of things where it would benefit, as I'm thinking things that we're rolling out or situations that we could improve. As far as our offerings right now and what we're looking to in the future, we probably will go with the colo, and do that and make that investment. But it's an investment, and it's not just an investment up front. It's an investment as you cycle hardware and replace it. It's an investment into technical resources to be able to manage it. There's a lot more when you look at total cost of ownerships, which, by the way, is the only conversation you should be having with customers is return on investment and total cost of ownership. You need to evaluate that internally as well.
It's a very good point.
I'd rather spend the time managing my customers' expectations and environments than my own. So I don't know. I'm really happy with the service. I think it's very affordable through Azure, especially through the CSP program. And it's scalable. And, I'm happy with it. So I can see us moving forward with it quite a bit. There are a lot of scenarios that, I look at, so we use Veeam and we go to a managed backup portal in Azure, and that's where we host our environment. And I look at it, and so taking that, for example, if I were hosting that in a colo, I could always spin up the customer's VM as a nested VM on my management server where I control the resources. I don't have to go to Azure and expand my resources or try to scale out live. I can do that in a colo easily, right? I control it. All I got to do is right click, new VM, set the resources on it, and restore or fail over to that. And it's pretty easy. But I think, going back to that, that's a lot more to manage and maintain, and licensing a track every month with SPLAs and things like that. So I don't think everybody should be against Azure or AWS or anybody else for that matter right off the bat. When it comes to competitors and other things like that, I can easily look at a lot of those, and I can say that my implementations are more secure than theirs, just based on the facts alone, not based on how we implemented it, but the facts alone is their information is going to be safer in Azure than some hodgepodge solution provided by another managed service provider. You have a capability of, we call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You have the capability of dropping a lot of that in a sales situation with the customer, purely based on the fact that you're using enterprise grade cloud. I mean, hell, if it's good enough for the Department of Defense, why isn't it good enough for my small business clients?
So I actually did a demo yesterday, since we were talking about automated scaling and things like that. And I know you guys are going to go, he's a Kaseya nerd, but I did a demo with the product that they bought earlier this year called Unigma. And one of the things that they were talking about was automated scaling of Azure AWS. So they were actually walking me through some of their automated alerts and remediation for it. So they had an instance on Azure. It was a single CPU, and they had an alert that said, CPU is over 80% for however many seconds. And they scaled it up to a 2 vCPU VM immediately. And I just thought that was really, really neat. But it has a lot of different pieces to it. But since Zach was talking about the scaling side, that just brought that to mind.
Well, yeah. I mean, sure, you could potentially do that in your colo, assuming you have the hardware.
Yeah.
I'm doing it.
But in Azure, we can do it at any given time. The resources are infinite as far as we're concerned, and I think that provides a lot of value to that conversation. I think when you're talking scalability, high availability, failover, things like that, for the price that you pay, I think there's a lot of value to a relationship with Azure or AWS or whomever, With that being said, too, we monitor, script, and automate a lot of Azure-related stuff in LabTech. So that's been a pretty big push for me, is that as we're moving forward, we're trying to really step back from each situation and evaluate, do we need infrastructure for this? Does the customer need infrastructure? Can we come to a better value-based proposition by throwing them in Azure? So because of that, we started to evaluate our automation and capabilities with Azure, with LabTech scripting and stuff like that. So we're able to resize hard disks in Azure and connect to it with Azure RM, which is the PowerShell modules and stuff like that, out of scripts in LabTech. I can spin up VMs running a script from LabTech. So you could do the same by monitoring the resources, no different than an on-premise VM, and monitor it and trigger autofix actions to trigger a script that instead calls Azure and scales that CPU or hard drive as you grow too. I think the scalability is key. I think with that being said too, I always make it very clear, I don't sell the cheapest offering. I don't. And that tends to be the argument against Azure and things like that is the price for some folks. I've got this customer right now, I won't go into pricing. We assume that everybody in here is an MSP, but you got to be careful too with it being on YouTube and stuff like that. But we've got a customer where they gladly paid 10 times more to go to fully hosted infrastructure in Azure because of the benefits behind it. They asked if they could pay up front for the year.
And what benefits did you show them?
Well, fortunately for us, sometimes your biggest sales advantage is your competition. So they were with one of our competitors. They had hosted VMs by them in a colo, provided by that provider. Well, it was going down regularly. The specs, the speeds were slow, things like that. And they say, well, we look at our VM and it says it has 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM and 200 gigs of hard drive space, but they don't know what's underlying on the host that provider is using. So they were constantly going down. They were having slowness issues. Their backups were questionable. They once had a opportunity that they needed to restore. Opportunity. They had that opportunity that you were talking about earlier to restore, and the provider didn't have it. So they lost 6 months of data. And so they had situations where the power was going out. So the provider was borrowing a generator from them to power their data center. So just absurd stuff. And so our value was that you need infrastructure that's available when you need it. We can provide that. What is it worth to you? What is the cost of downtime? What is the PR hit that when your customers that are paying you for your services are not able to access those services, and then it costs them money? It snowballs and it goes downhill. To them, it was an easy solution. It was an easy answer. And so that's why it's a whole different conversation. But when I talk about sales stuff, you're selling value to them. You're not selling a price point. I make 73%, I'd have to look it up, but about 73% margins on that customer still after moving them to Azure. So you can still make money on it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people sell Datto, they still make money on it. Some of us, we argue that it's expensive. It reduces margins. It reduces whatever your reasons are. many providers still sell it and they still make good money on it. It's all in about how you pitch and propose the solution. And it won't fit for customers, and I'm okay with that. Because if a customer doesn't want the proper solution that we recommend to them, maybe we're not the provider for them.
So going back to the scripting piece, Zach, I know that you love scripting. What kind of things have you been able to script, Zach, using PowerShell for Azure?
Well, I mean, like the obvious one is like provisioning. If we need to do an Azure workload, like I've set up like basic forms that like I fill out, customer name, location, I have several drop downs of like, okay, like what is this for? Is it a DC? Is it an application server? And then when I submit that form, it hits a orchestration server, which fires off a series of scripts that auto provision like about what I'm about to deploy. And that saves, untold amounts of time. That's just one example. Other examples are like I do VMware as a service. So, and I do that pretty cost effectively. Like as I can do a 32 gig node pair of nodes with 32 gigs, 8 cores, and 600 gigs of SSD accelerated 15,000 RPM SAS data stores for less than what it costs to run a medium-sized application server in Azure. But the real power there is the vendor I use specifically has bare metal as a service that I can activate via API calls. So I can provision physical hardware using scripts, which is downright amazing. So it's just like a customer, it's like, oh, well, like we want a bunch of VMs in the cloud. If I can actually sit down and be like, all right, well, if it's like 4 or 5 VMs and I can give you just a dedicated cluster with VMware ESX Enterprise with vCenter Enterprise Plus and NSX, I can fire off a script and then like have that provisioned in about 10 minutes, booted, ready to use. And then we have a set of reverse proxies that present the vCenter instance to the end users and to our technicians. So that, one of the reasons we do that is like for clients that have an internal IT department, right? And they're like mid-level guys. Like they don't know what Azure is. They don't know how to use Azure, but they want to be able to manage their stuff. But they know how to ESXi with vCenter because, they spun up the free version and they're screwing around with it and they like it. So like I give them a cluster and a vCenter instance that they just use like it's on-prem. And that costs way less for me than doing it all in Azure. And it's something that they're familiar with. And that's a use case type thing, but that's one of those ways that I use orchestration and scripting.
Excellent. And I see that Quentin answered it privately, but I just want to go back to Brian's question. As someone with limited Azure experience, how does pricing compare to on-site solutions? And I think you hit the nail on the head, Quentin. They're not comparable one bit. I mean, yeah, you could compare the pricing, but they are two completely different beasts. There are completely different reasons to go fully hosted versus on-site. If you look at just hardware versus the cost per hour or whatever, Azure might end up costing you less, but now you have to worry about redundant internet and all that other expensive stuff that goes with having something hosted elsewhere, so that way people can continue to access it 24/7. Am I missing the point there, Quentin?
No, it's a completely different sale. You can't compare on-premise to cloud, whether it's whatever you want to call it, private cloud or public cloud, Azure, your colo. They're not a comparable sales discussion. In fact, oftentimes you should not provide both options as a comparative solution to the customer. You need to evaluate which one is the right one and talk to them about that. And if that doesn't work, maybe fall back to the other, right? Maybe if cloud hosted isn't the right solution, or maybe you feel that it is right, it's just not going to work out in the cards for them, then maybe you can say, well, why don't we look at redoing this with on-premise infrastructure? You're going to see ups and downs. You're going to see some areas where one might cost more than the other, short term, long term. You're going to see one where the other one in the same proposal, certain pieces of it are going to cost more or less. So it's a completely different sale. It's like going to buy a car. If you go to buy a car and your requirements are low, right? I just need a car with 4 seats. Well, a sales rep might look at you and he might say, well, you need this BMW and you might need this Honda Civic. Well, you need to filter and evaluate the expectations and needs a little bit more to make sure it's the right solution, and you focus your sales track on that solution.
Yeah, about the only time you really compare them is if you have sufficient data to do a TCO analysis.
Right. Yep. TCO, ROI, looking at that. We try to make it easy to do business with. So in certain scenarios where operational expenditure versus a capital expenditure is more advantageous for the customer or easier pill for them to swallow, we'll then evaluate, do they still need on-premise or do they need cloud? If they need on-premise, we'll work out a leasing or financing situation through our leasing partners, or we'll pitch Azure if that's the right solution as well. So that's what I mean. There's so many different aspects to that they're not apples to apples.
And that's one thing I didn't even think to say. CapEx versus OpEx is sometimes an easy decision for a company to make. Sometimes they don't care.
Sometimes it's a matter of you got the deal and you didn't. And so if you guys don't know about it, actually, I just had a good conversation with Great America Leasing today. We're a huge Great America partner. I mean, purely because of our relationship on the copier side. But we're a Mike shakes his head, he knows. And you're talking, millions a year in financing through Great America. So we have very good standing with them. And they're great partners of ours. They have integrations with ConnectWise, with PSAs. And what they'll actually do, a lot of people don't understand, a lot of times, even though you pay one invoice on the copier side to the leasing agency, the cost per click is a pass through to the dealer. So it's advantageous for the customer because it's one bill. They pay one company, and then essentially Great America or whoever the leaser is takes that money and it's a pass through straight to the dealer. So that rate's negotiated with the dealer. On the IT side, it's the same. So I had a good conversation with Great America today. They'll do the same for hardware and service as a rental. They call it HAAR because it's still leased. It's a lease agreement. It's a contractual obligation. And what they'll do is you can invoice the customer one invoice. Now in states like California, we don't tax service unless it's tied to hardware or an implementation. So if I sell a server and professional services to implement that, I have to tax the whole thing. If I am selling, in this scenario, maybe we're leasing them their infrastructure, but then also selling them managed services. They're two different. We want to separate them out as two different line items. Otherwise, we have to tax the whole item as a whole thing. So what Great America will actually do, kind of getting to the point, is they'll allow you to lease the hardware, and the customer pays the hardware lease and the managed services lease to Great America, and then the managed services is a pass through to the provider. So that's all negotiated with you. That's all your managed service agreement, your terms and conditions, your contracts. But Great America will basically make it so you can go, hey, customer, here's your one invoice for $2,000 a month. And they pay one company, and then it comes through as a pass-through. And the integration with ConnectWise will allow you to submit a credit application directly from an opportunity in ConnectWise, and then also track and control the invoices and payments from the customer to with Great America in ConnectWise. And if Great America doesn't receive a payment from the customer, it opens a service ticket in ConnectWise for you automatically on your sales board.
Can I just say you are a fantastic ConnectWise salesperson?
Still not enough for me.
Yeah. All right. So this person is curious if anyone is using Chef or something similar to help manage infrastructures. It sounds like it's some combination of RMM plus PowerShell.
Well, it's 100% RMM. It's just what scripting language or scripts you are invoking with your RMM. So for us, it's 100% RMM.
So it sounds like Chef is a third-party tool.
Chef's an automation tool.
Okay.
There actually is somebody in the channel that uses it. I can't remember his name. Was it Jason? He's actually out your way, Steve.
Jason Slagle, wasn't it?
Yeah, that sounds right. And he uses it pretty heavily, but I can't say that I have any firsthand experience with it.
Well, they're also an ISP. So they're a managed services is a smaller portion of their business. They're primarily a service provider and, as far as internet services. So I know they use Chef. They might use Ansible as well for automating stuff on that side too. They're quite unique though. They're looking at, what were they looking at? They're looking at moving their CRM and stuff over to Zoho One or whatever it is, I think. Wasn't that Jason or was that somebody else?
Gotcha.
Oh, I think it may have been somebody else. But yeah, I think it depends on your needs. I think as a service provider, you need to be very careful. And you need to select your stack. And you need to be very selective about it and make sure it fits your needs. And because the whole premise is we can make situations that are repeatable very, very easily, right? We need to be able to just get in there and do it real quick. And so realistically, your RMM should be able to handle majority of it, whether they can call PowerShell or Bash or whatever scripting language you're using from directly within their scripting engine, or you're using it to trigger a script that's saved as a file somewhere. Maybe you're using it to call a Bash script remotely versus using Bash directly within the RMM scripting engine. But I at least for us, that's why even the Azure stuff, I try and trigger it out of Lab Tech and make sure all that's done in Lab Tech, because that's what we work out of. Lab Tech is our tool. So even though it may not directly call something or manipulate something directly on the hardware or hardware in this case, it's our tool. It's what we use.
Excellent. Zach, anything you'd like to add to the automation portion?
Not really. I mean, just learn it. Things like Chocolati are amazing for workstation setup and stuff like that. I mean, you can use automation in a lot of places most people don't realize you can use it. I mean, the rule of thumb should be if you ever have to do anything more than once, automate it.
Yes.
Yep.
I think it was Tom, I don't remember how to pronounce his last name, Limoncelli or something like that. Said, never spend an hour doing what you can automate in a day.
Yeah. So
might have been somebody else.
Based on that, I like the way you said that, chocolate.
I'm still trying to figure out if it's Azure, or Azure.
I like to call it chocolately.
We use it too. A lot of our automation is built around it, and we use our RMM to trigger and call those scripts. So we use, and I probably pronounce it wrong, but like Mike's saying, I say chocolatey. That's probably wrong. I say Azure, or Azure, I mean, call Dado even, you know, I brought up that neighborhood. You'll hear 3 people from there even pronounce it different ways too, or you know, whatever company you're calling.
Right. I've heard Dado more than once.
Yeah, and so regardless, we use, and maybe wrong, I pronounce it chocolatey, very, very heavily because it's scalable and it's very dynamic. I know a lot of folks use Ninite and Ninite solution. I think it's really, really good. I think it's a great offering if that fits for what you're trying to achieve. We use chocolatey because I can do more than just third-party patching with it. I can do full spin up of servers between chocolatey, DSC, which is desired state configuration in PowerShell. If you don't know what that is, look it up. So between those two and just the scripting engine within my RMM, I can actually use my RMM to trigger all those other services as well. We can achieve absurd amounts of automation. I mean, if I run into something one time, we try and automate it. You know, if it's something that was triggered because of an alarm or something like that, we figure out what to find or how we can find something to automatically trigger that automation or remediation. But your RMM really should be the heartbeat of your organization and your service delivery. That's just me. That could be wrong, but you know, that's the way I feel about it. I want my techs trying to work out of one piece of the pie as much as possible. You know, I don't want them looking at 4, 5, 6 different interfaces and portals to achieve one thing. That's not the objective of a managed service provider. You know, the objective of a managed service provider is being able to do it efficiently and do it quickly and do it proficiently as well, you know, and we do that by achieving those results with the tools that we have. And the other piece too is when you look at automation or scripting, there's no box. You can't be confined into a box when you're looking at that. You need to step back and look at the entire situation and think of how you can use your current stack to get to that point, whether you're calling those third-party services from within your tools or not, and really just eliminate the box, because that's where you're going to see the best results. I see people look at a tool and they feel like, oh, I can only do this with this tool. It lacks this or it has this. Ultimately, most things you can make them do what you want them to do. It's just a matter of how you execute that and achieve that. So that's going to be the biggest benefit, is just stepping back away from that and using those tools.
Right,
Excellent.
exactly. I mean, like, what makes more sense? Taking a week to onboard a customer and just throw agents on everything and figure it out, or take 3 months and set it up so every time you slap an agent on a workstation, it automatically sets the workstation up without being touched.
Excellent.
I think, so somebody in Discord brought up a good point. You know, the other piece to that, which probably doesn't get touched on enough, but that's our purpose too. It's done the same way every time. You know, they mentioned consistency and accuracy. The second you invoke a human to do something, you're asking for problems and you're asking for errors. If you can automate things and do it in a scripted and automatable manner, you know, or automated manner, I'm sorry, you remove the probability of error. We're all humans. We make mistakes. Make them constantly, daily. If I can automate something, I'm less likely to make a mistake. And so, you know, going back to time saving is not just one piece. There's a lot that goes into that. And that's one of the biggest ones, is removing human error. Maybe you forgot a step. Maybe that checklist, you didn't print it out that day, or you lost it, so you started a new checklist or whatever it was, and you're marking off your steps and you forgot one, or, you know, somebody else did it. You can't guarantee. You know, I've heard, well, they checked off the step. Well, that doesn't mean they actually did it. So now I got to trust but verify, right? Well, with automation, you remove that. It's guaranteed because you wrote it to do it a certain way.
Interesting. Well, we're coming up to 2:30 here. Does anyone have any last questions before we wrap up for our awesome panelists today? I'd say don't all speak up at once, but you're not allowed to speak. Quentin, do you have any final words that you'd like to leave people with?
No, I mean, well, I think I talked a lot as it is, but
yeah, you kind of did.
I like what we do. You know, I like the service that we're able to provide. I like this community. I think it gives us the opportunity to see how other folks are doing it. And well, the way I do it may not work for you. It may not work for Mike. It may not work for Zach, but we might find certain pieces that each other are doing that work for us as well. And so it's a good benefit to have this community. The biggest thing, like I said, is you know, going back earlier for you folks, whether it's just the Hyper-V or VMware or virtualization in general, just take a step back and take a look at the situation and evaluate it from a business objective. You know, this is centered around virtualization. Well, why do we always virtualize? Because of the business expectation that those servers are now portable, they're highly available, they're easier to back up, they're easier to migrate. Those all fall in line with business objectives. It's not just because we think some technology product is cool. The customer doesn't care how cool your technology product is. This allows us to align our cool technology products and the hype that we have behind it with their business objectives, and virtualization is one big piece of that. So, you know, when you're looking at these situations, really, really look at that. I've heard people say, you know, virtualizing one server is a waste of time. It's not. I promise you it's not. If you think that it is, you're doing something wrong, and you're not evaluating your options and your tools that you have out there available to you. Worst case is I can pop a 3040 from one of their offices and throw that server on there to get them up and running if I need to in an emergency. That in and of itself right there was a benefit to the 15 extra minutes it took to install the Hyper-V role on their physical hardware and right click and hit new VM, you know. I mean, that right there is that should answer any question right there as to why we do what we do with virtualization.
And, you know, one thing to understand about virtualization as well is that it needs to be used correctly.
Yes.
I actually had a former employer, and I'm not employed there anymore, where the owner of the company came to my desk and said, I really hate this virtualization thing. We should have never done it. And, like, I honestly was speechless because, like, wow, right? And, well, let's put that in context. They had two very high-powered, like, 128-core hosts, dual sockets, you know, just like all of the RAM, like something like 196 gigs of RAM running, you know, 100 VMs on a storage subsystem that was two basic NAS boxes with 7,200 RPM drives.
On a RAID 5.
No, they were RAID 10.
Oh.
But they were 7,200 RPM drives, like Seagate Constellations or something like that. And, like, guess what? The performance was absolutely horrid. And, you know, this guy was going on and on about how he spent so much money on these hosts. And, like, why don't we have better performance? And, like, you know, I was like, you need to spend about another $15,000 on storage. They wouldn't do it. Well, we can't afford that. We can't afford that. This should just work. And you can see why I don't work there anymore.
100 VMs. You're going to be spending more than 15 grand on storage.
Yeah. And like the vast majority of them were Linux VMs, and like they actually worked well. Like MySQL databases, like they had like what could be argued as semi-decent performance for 15 people. And I don't know how. There was magic. Like maybe MySQL was caching a boatload of stuff in RAM. But yeah, like it was like I still have nightmares about that. I had disk latency of over 500 milliseconds on that storage subsystem. It was spin locked to the max.
That's one of the biggest things that I learned early on, trying to do any kind of clustering or anything like that. Obviously you need shared storage. Well, at the time you did. You needed some kind of shared storage, and one of the biggest reasons that they told people not to virtualize SQL was because nobody properly planned for their IOPS. No one ever did. But then solid state started coming around, or faster drives. People started realizing, hey, I'm running SQL. Maybe I should listen to Microsoft run a RAID 10. And it started coming around. And that's why you see a lot more stuff now that's getting virtualized when they said that it wasn't supposed to. But IOPS, that's the one. Everybody has the common sense to look at processor, memory, disk space. Nobody looks at the disk speed, the performance of your storage. And that's one mistake that a lot of people will only make one time.
It could be said that virtualization lives and dies by storage speed.
I feel like there are some people that will continue to make that mistake over and over and over. And that's why they have a lot of former employees like Zach.
I worked for a MSP that was very similar, and much like you, that's why I was not there. It was in between bouncing between two enterprise environments. I took a short pit stop at an MSP, and it was very similar. Their standard go-to, because it was a price-based conversation, was virtualized with 7,200 RPM drives on a RAID 5 for everything. That was the answer to everything. While then the techs hated virtualization, the customers hated virtualization, and it was a mess. And you can't backpedal out of that. You can't fix that. The way to fix that is by spending more money. So, I went there to be their CTO. They recruited me. I went there, and that was just stuff that they were not going to change as an MSP, because they wanted to consistently be able to provide the cheapest solution so the customer wouldn't say no. And their answer to that was that exact implementation, time and time again. Also, the owner, had a feeling that nothing else besides RAID 5 mattered. Anything else is pointless because you couldn't expand them. My RAID 5, I can expand it all day long. It's saying, well, there's sacrifices to that. But yeah, sometimes it's not about the product, it's about the solution as a whole, which is the product and the service, together. And that can truly affect the way that the customer perceives something. Like Zach was saying, they couldn't understand. They invested all this money, and why does virtualization suck so bad? Well, it wasn't the virtualization. They actually spent the right money in the right areas where they were told to. It sounds like those are heavy investments, but somebody proposed the wrong product to meet the expectations, and now they had a distaste for the entire solution. So it's not just virtualization. Sometimes it's the person implementing it too.
Right. In my case, it's what led directly to my company. They hired me to build an MSP, and I did, and these are the kind of decisions they were making, and it eventually led to a come to Jesus conversation about, you are terrible at this, and you just need to stop. And so I talked them into it. They did, and gave me their customer base, and here I am.
Good for you. Well, guys, we are going to wrap up. Feel free to stick around for what I like to call the after party. For those of you watching this on YouTube, sorry, you don't get the after party. Thanks, everyone. Next week, we've got Third Wall joining us for a demonstration on their LabTech plugin. So feel free to hop on mspwebinars.com to learn more about that and to check out all of the pre-recorded webinars and all the bonus content. Thank you so much to Mike, Zach, and Quentin, who I roped into this 30 seconds before we started, or maybe after we started. I'm still not sure. I appreciate all three of you guys.
Wait, was I involved in this?
I don't know. You didn't say much.
No.
I do. I appreciate all three of you guys, and I hope to have you three back on again for another webinar. Thanks so much, everyone. You all have a great day. I can never find the button to stop YouTube.
Are you the matchmaker?
I'm seeing what we can make happen here.
So this says it's still streaming on YouTube.
It's streaming again to an unlisted one.
Oh, are you the MSP matchmaker?
I am.
Just like a
whatever. I'm whatever you guys want me to be, as long as you pay me on Patreon. I will whore myself out for the right price. Okay.
$20 to strip. Let's go.
I'm not even going to look that up, so that way I don't feel obligated. I don't even know what that is.
Excellent. So let's have Quentin. Why don't you go over like your stack real quick, and what you typically charge your customers and what you offer.
Sure. I got probably about another 15 minutes or so. I might have a call coming here in the next minute.
That's fine.
I actually get to go deliver a proposal today, so that'll be fun. Our stack is our standard stack is all inclusive. We don't do tiering. We don't allow the customer to pick and choose. That happens to work for us. We offer them the solution, and they either buy it or don't. It's not out of arrogance or cockiness or anything like that. It's purely based out of our ability to scale and support it and meet the expectations that we're promising them, and being able to do it efficiently. We include Office 365 Business Premium as a standard. Right now, we're moving to the Sophos stack entirely. We were Bitdefender for endpoint and servers and stuff like that. So we're moving over to Sophos' entire stack. We were using their encryption stuff too. So Sophos Endpoint Advanced, Sophos Intercept X, Sophos Server Advanced. We do Sophos XG firewalls. That's included in our MSA. We provide the hardware onboarding, and then the monthly subscriptions included in their managed service agreement. Veeam as our backup solution. We include a BDR appliance that's scaled to size based on the customer's environment during onboarding, and then we do rental VM licenses. Right now, Reflection is our spam filtering. We're kind of evaluating that. Been pretty happy with a couple other options out there. As much as I'd like to move to Sophos Central, it's not feature parity with Reflection yet. But looking at Exchange's advanced online threat protection and their stuff, that might be a good move for us. It's like $1.40 or something like that. So it's not too bad price.
I'm on that. It works really well.
Yeah, I like it. I like what I've seen so far. Reflection was nice because it's like 59 cents per mailbox, and it worked really, really well for a long time.
What's the difference between Reflection and 365, basically advanced protection?
Just different offerings, different engines, different feature sets.
I guess what I'm asking, what do you get more with the advanced Exchange protection versus what normally comes with 365?
The biggest piece is the built-in integration. I mean, it's native to the Exchange Online environment. The scripting capabilities for editing and monitoring templates and feature sets, things like that. Reflection, we have integration in the ConnectWise for it, for spam stats, for reports and things like that, as well as billing, even though we don't bill our customer for each line item. So that's one thing, going back a little bit. We don't bill our customers for each line item. We're at all-in seat price, so they see one line item on their invoices. But we have all of our products they're monthly subscription models. So Sophos, we're MSP Connect Flex, so it's month to month. Same with Reflection and Veeam and the Sophos XG firewall. All of our products fit the model that we sell to our customers, and we make sure they all integrate into ConnectWise as well at a minimum for billing, because we need to track that to accurately monitor our margins and see where we're at on that. So the customer doesn't see that. That's hidden from them on their invoice. But for us, I can quickly run a report against agreements and see what my profit margins are on my agreements to make sure they're not out of line. So the customer doesn't see it. We track it. If you're an MSP and you're not tracking your costs 100%, you're wrong, because you have no idea. You have nothing to base or gauge anything off of. So we include all you can eat, on-site, and remote support. Our primary objective is always remote. For a number of reasons, it benefits us, but as well as the customer. We always pitch it to them. We want to get you back and productive as quickly as possible. Our way of do that is to remotely get in and take care of it, because we can do that faster than we can drive to you, assuming we have somebody available to drive to you. But we do have an abuse clause in there that states we can evaluate your current pricing structure. And if your prices do not meet the expected cost, essentially, of what an account with your metrics and specifics would typically cost us, we can either discuss price changes or canceling the contract. So I think that was it. OpenDNS, Huntress. As we're moving to the Sophos stack, we're able to evaluate maybe some of our other products, because a lot of their products fit needs of others, and see what we need. But right now, that's pretty much what we have. And then, the typical quarterly business review, technology planning with them. I think that's it.
What's your seat price?
Our typical seat price is $125. In compliance environments, it's $150, and we're at about a 70% profit margin. We're looking at scaling both of those up because we can, because it allows us to provide different levels of service. The market can bear it. Maybe your market can't. That's why there's different averages across different markets. The argument is that I'm from California, so I'm able to charge that. I'm waiting for somebody to say that. Mike?
What? I'm sorry.
Why I can charge what I charge because I'm in California.
Damn straight. Inflation state.
So I'm in Northern California. I'm in a couple of my branches are in a little bit more impoverished regions of California. And, high unemployment rate. What is it?
Webley put the better use.
Average, the median income is like $32,000 a year. So it comes that we're a little bit more picky and choosy with our clients. We set our price, and if they don't fit it, they don't fit it as well. But yeah, so that's basically it. The reason for the compliance environments for the higher rate is we include encryption by default, both for the endpoints and email. And data loss, we include data loss protection as a standard, but we start to fine tune and hone that stuff in a lot more. And the customer doesn't get a choice of whether they're going to buy encryption or not. We're encrypting their stuff. And so by including it, we remove cost objections. We remove the nickel and diming. It's part of your service, and we include that. So that's the big difference between the two.
Excellent. Zach, do you mind running through your stack real quick?
Sorry, I was responding to a ticket.
It's okay. And I have to step away for a moment, but just keep going.
So I run SolarWinds MSP RMM, and I use their backup, their Bitdefender. I augment that with InterceptX from Sophos. I also use their web protection client, which does the content filtering, URL filtering, DNS filtering, that kind of stuff. Everything in the stack is included. I do tiering, but my customers aren't exactly aware that the tiers exist. We just have like 3 baselines depending on the size of the customer that we kind of start with and then build a solution that fits their needs. And I do HAS. My most successful HAS implementations are on-prem RDS, but I'm thinking about doing that via cloud. Right now, I'm in a very rural market, so getting reliable backup internet is very tough, which kind of limits my ability to move premise equipment off-site. I don't think I really heard what else everybody was covering. My backups include disaster recovery, so like I have a colo where I spin stuff up, or I can spin it up in Azure or AWS. My PSA is actually MSP Manager. Just that works well for us because we're a small team. Like my entire company is like 3 people. Some of the automation stuff that we do that's like kind of we include in the stack is our hardening scripts. We rework the network to be more secure. Like we do segmentation, server hardening, workstation hardening. We're doing vulnerability scans like every week of everything. We do PCI, HIPAA, FINRA, GLBA, SOX. I don't have any customers that actually need SOX, but like I know how to do it. And we're very security focused. That's like kind of our niche. One of my guys is a pen tester, and like we can do that stuff. He does a lot of like 0-day research and stuff on his own, and we try to be like really, really aware of like threat landscape and risk assessment and all of that fun stuff. And we're really exploring the idea of going the MSSP route with managed SIEM and SOC services and that kind of stuff.
So we're doing the same. We're evaluating good partners for SOC and SIEM right now.
Who are you looking at?
Oh, we looked at Vigilan. We looked at who's the other one? Our primary premise is we wanted to have integration with ConnectWise. So that really limits our scope unless we develop some kind of API integration or something like that for them. But let's see. I think it was Vigilan, and there was another one too.
Shark something, I think, is another one. I actually have a meeting with Vigilan tomorrow.
It was Black something.
Carbon Black?
Black Stratus.
Oh, Black Stratus. Okay.
So,
I was like, how the hell did you get Carbon Black on the phone?
Vigilan and Black Stratus. And so
yeah, Black Stratus is the shark people, Cyber Shark. Okay.
Yeah, the biggest piece for us, like you said, is truly understanding in depth the compliancy regulations and services that you're selling. So that's the biggest for us. We're not trying to be another boxed up service provider that says, oh, we sell you whatever compliance. No, we want to understand so we can have at-length conversations with you what that actually means as a customer.
Right. And honestly, compliance is the easy part. Like, you can get compliance to be pretty cookie cutter once you understand it. The hard part is I have never in my life seen an outsourced SOC that was worth a damn. There's a lot of kind of misunderstanding of what people think a SOC is. And like in the MSP space, I've seen it mostly treated like a SOC is incident response. It's people reacting to detections, reacting to threats. And, incident response is an important aspect of what a SOC does, but it's not the only thing. And being proactive as an outsourced SOC is extremely difficult because it requires a very, very, very in-depth understanding and knowledge of the customer's environment.
Yeah, they should be analyzing behavior and heuristics and being able to provide recommendations before stuff happens instead of just after.
Right. Yeah. They should be in there pen testing and risk assessing and doing all of that stuff. And it really only works if you own the entire IT vertical for a client. because you do need that level of integration with internal assets and like the systems administrators that are managing stuff day to day. And so like if you have like them on a fully managed all you can eat, like we're handling everything agreement, then you could probably jump into doing SOC for them. But just as a standalone SOC service for some random, enterprise that needs to check a box, like that's really hard to do successfully.
Well, fortunately for us, we have our copiers on their network too, so we just own the whole network,
Yeah, you would have turned this into discussing managed print versus managed IT. And how when you have managed IT customers, it's easy to get in for managed print, and when you got managed print customers, it's easy to get in for managed IT.
Well, then you just control the whole network, and then you can control the security everywhere. You're not just Now, I think that's very important. I think that's the challenge. A lot of folks are selling outsourced SOC, even MSSPs to large enterprises and things like that. And that puts you at a little bit of a mercy at their internal policies and dictations as to how that's happened and carried out. I much prefer our model where we're all inclusive and not just handling a small piece of the pie, because that can quickly devalue the service. It goes back to that same conversation we had with virtualization. Nothing about virtualization inherently is good or bad. Obviously there's a lot of benefits to it when it's done right. There's a lot of disadvantages, like you saw, when it's done wrong. SOC and their services or providing those services can be the same. You can have the best SOC team in the world, but when you team that up with a horrible internal IT department,
right? Yeah, like
very quickly.
Shitty IT departments like are the biggest vulnerability there is.
Or they're not taking your recommendations or your remediation attempts or steps or information you're providing. So quickly they look at it and they go, "Oh, our SOC sucks." Well, no, there's a lot more.
Right, yeah, it's the same analogy to the virtualization. Shitty virtualization makes everybody hate virtualization. A shitty IT team that doesn't take recommendations from the SOC makes people think SOCs are shitty.
So the fully managed, makes that a lot easier to control that relationship, which is why we are a fully managed IT provider. We offer fully managed contracts because we can control the entire expectation instead of just providing a managed backup. Well, you provide a managed backup, you can't control the expectations. You can't even really promise anything.
Right. I mean, look at Equifax. Them having an outsourced SOC would have done nothing. Nothing.
Right.
All you have is an internal IT team doing stupid shit, which led to a breach. And if they'd had an outsourced SOC, the outsourced SOC is now on the hook for, everything that happened. Because, well, we had a SOC. They should have been protecting us. It's like, well, you can't protect against stupid.
Well, clearly they would have thrown him under the bus too, based on their response.
Absolutely, yeah. And that, like if I'm going to be a SOC provider, that is not a position I want to be in.
Right. I think ultimately, to some extent, what it also comes down to, you can very clearly set proper expectations for any of your managed services, whether it is fully managed or backups or SOC. But it's about setting that expectations and having a relationship with the customer at that point, to the point where you can come in and say, hey, it wasn't our SOC. It was your IT department. And here's why. But you need to have a certain level and a certain relationship that's value driven with them, where they're going to value you coming in and talking to them and presenting that to them. Because you'll probably see, the other side of our business, when we come in and do solutions-based implementations that are on their network, all of a sudden the product sucks. No, the implementation of our product uncovered underlying issues that you've had for years. Well, no, because I'm the IT guy, it's my network. My network is perfect. Their network is their firstborn child, and there is nothing wrong with it. It is an angel. And so you need to make sure that you set different expectations and have a different relationship if you're doing partially managed things.
Right. And like one thing I wanted to point out during the live stream, but I didn't want to call you out in front of everybody, but you talked about how Azure and AWS are secure because DoD uses them. That's actually kind of a misnomer. In the hardcore cybersecurity realm, AWS and Azure is treated as an untrusted environment. And when DoD is sitting in Azure or AWS, they're actually siloed. They get their own. They get their own. Yeah, and so that's like one of the big discussions on the cybersecurity side of things. Is like if you take your cybersecurity seriously, you can't go Azure or AWS because of all the proof of concept stuff out there of jumping tenants. Like it's like shared. With the shared RAM and stuff like that, like there have been dudes that have been able to exploit VMs in different tenants through shared memory. It's crazy hard to do, but when your concern is like nation state threat actors, like that's the stuff you have to care about.
No, I agree with that. When you look at it, that it was a very high level and vague reason for it. Typically, when you're doing a FUD scenario with a customer, I'm not going to go down into the technical specification and details. The reality,
I mean, like in the context of like for most people, it's fine and perfectly secure.
Yeah.
But like, if you're a DoD outsourced foreign intelligence service, like maybe you shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Facts. My faxes don't make noise. We got FOIP, fax over IP.
There you go.
They don't make any noise. It comes straight to my inbox.
Don't get me started on fax and HIPAA.
So it's more of a FUD-based scenario, really, because you see it on like our sysadmin and stuff all the time, and well, you can't trust the cloud, and it's really people trying to justify their jobs is what it is. And I guarantee you, I can penetrate that network much faster than they can penetrate Azure or anywhere else. The customer I'm doing a proposal with today, their current IT provider doesn't like the cloud. It's insecure. It's dangerous. Ooh, it's not in your environment.
Yeah, it's a risk assessment question, like risk probabilities and things like that. Like,
well, they've got port 21 and port 25 open to the outside world, and they're a medical provider.
Right. Yeah.
But hey, it sure is insecure.
Right.
So it's really they're FUD-based scenarios.
My server in my closet behind a $9 deadbolt lock is more secure than Azure with its SSAE SOC 2 compliant, SAE 16 SOC 2 and armed guards. That's more secure than the cloud. Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Sorry, I've been really quiet, guys. But I'm sorry. Did you say something, Mike?
No, I was saying I got to hop off because it's hot as balls in this room right now, and I want to open my door.
I don't want to know anything about.
Yeah, you do.
Your
no. Yeah, but I got to hop off of here because I also have a call coming up here in a little bit. Yeah, it was great talking to you guys. Hope to be back on here soon.
Awesome. So I've been really quiet because my kid. I've got two kids. The older one, the even more devious one. She got this fantastic idea where she thought she's going to try and pull a fast one. So we've got a rule, and the rule is if on your daily scorecard you get an 85 or better, then you get screen time. So this is the scorecard she brings home. She didn't change this at all. She didn't change one of these numbers. She didn't even change this one. She just crossed this out and in her own handwriting made an ugly 8 and the nicest 5 she's ever made. And so my wife's cousin is who watches the kids during the day. And she said, so she brought this home. How bad do we ground her, or do we play along and believe her? And I said, here's what we do. Tell her, if you tell me your teacher changed it, then you can go and you can have your screen time tonight. That's fine. You can get your iPad, play your games, watch your videos, whatever you want to do. Tomorrow I'll call your teacher and I'll make sure. And if the teacher says that you lied, then you don't get screen time for a week. And so she asked Genevieve, how would you like to proceed? She's like, I don't. She went and got a snack and went outside and played. So so what I want to know is, how many times do you guys have clients try and pull this crap on you, where they try and fudge some crap and hand it to you and say, look, you gave me this quote and it's $1,000 less than you're charging me? You guys ever have some crappy, shady clients or anything like that?
Never had them manipulate a quote directly. Of course, I use e-signatures, so they can't.
That's true.
Yeah, one I'm about to drop this week, actually. But that's because, they should drop.
Yep.
Literally being too cheap.
Always.
All right,
Always
I got to drop, guys.
I'm going to do the same. Thanks, everyone, for sticking around. If you would like to continue to hang out in Zoom, you are welcome to do so. I just popped a link in the chat here. I'm going to close the webinar down, but there's a Zoom room that I keep open pretty much whenever there's not a webinar. So hop in that link. It's zoom.us/J, and the Zoom number after the J is /330-247-2471. I will see you guys in Zoom, and if not, I will see you next week for Third Wall. Take care, everyone.
Have you been looking for a way to stay focused on your goals and grow your MSP? Accountability groups from RocketMSP can help. We offer weekly accountability sessions that meet online with a group of your peers. Your success begins with accountability. Go to www.rocketmsp.io to join your accountability group today.